This talk has been classified M for mature audiences. It is not for persons under the age of 15, and while it does not cover any matters of a sexual nature, I've forgotten most of them, it may have some foul language. And as a result, parental guidance is highly recommended. The date was early 1950, and the place was aboard the aircraft carrier HMS Ark Royal, which was steaming in the English Channel off the south coast of England. My squadron at the time flew Seahawk jets. They were jet fighters, and our role was essentially ground attack. Now this meant that we would be launched from the carrier and then flew in close battle formation in divisions of 4 at 20 feet off the water at around about 850 kilometers an hour. At a pre-calculated distance from the target, we would pull up to 25,000 feet, roll over, and launch into a 45-degree rocket attack. We carried 8 supersonic rockets under each wing, guided by a gyroscopic gun sight in the cockpit. But there were occasions when we had to fly as an umbrella at 30,000 feet over the fleet. And the fleet usually was something like 40 to 50, 60 warships. As a fighter, the Seahawk had 4 20mm Hispano cannon mounted in the nose of the aircraft. Each gun fired 750 rounds a minute, 12 shells a second. To keep our hand in, whenever the carrier was in close proximity to a Royal Naval or a Royal Naval Air Station or an RAF air base, the carrier would arrange for a practice air-to-air gunnery shoot. On this particular day, the target was a nylon banner. The banner measured about 30 meters by 6 meters. It was attached at the front end to an 8mm long metal pole. And this bar had huge weights at the top and the bottom to cause it to fly in a vertical position. The metal bar in turn was attached to a 90-meter long steel cable, and that was towed by an RAF Meteor jet. Each plane taking part in the exercise was loaded with 120 rounds of shells per cannon, and the shells of each plane were painted a different color. As the shell flew through the air, friction would melt the paint, and if it penetrated the nylon barrier, it would leave a blob of colored paint behind. At the end of the exercise, the banner would be dropped by the tow plane at a shore-based airfield, and the painted holes would be counted as a percentage of the total shots fired. The exercise would run something as follows. The tug would take off and head out to a rendezvous point 7,000 feet over the sea. The carrier, steaming some 50 kilometers away, would launch 12 jets, 3 divisions of 4, and direct them to attack the target from a height of 11,000 feet. From a loose battle formation, you would dive down at about 850 kilometers an hour, range in on the target, and fire for perhaps a second or 2, before braking or ducking under the banner and taking up a perch position on the other side at 11,000 feet. You would then be zigzagging from one side to the other, getting in a burst of fire each time you ducked under the banner. Now, I knew only too well, to hit this target, you had to get as close as possible. But there were rules of engagement, especially your break-off distance, which reminds me of an incident at Royal Naval Air Station Lossiemouth in the early 50s. We had an ex-Luftwaffe pilot, a Colonel Krupinski, had been sent to Lossie to do a refresher course on jets. He had only flown the ME-262 for the Luftwaffe. His flying was absolutely impeccable. His speeds and height were spot on, perfect. And he was to take up a position as head of the European NATO Air Force. At his farewell dinner, he made a short speech. I have flown with my instructor. I have flown with the commander. I have flown with the group captain. And it is my considered opinion they are all fit to go solo. On the day of this exercise, I was leading a division of 4 and was first on the catapult. It was a clear day, not a cloud in the sky. We flew off at 20 feet over the water, and we had no problem finding the target. For the first attack, I pushed really close, and I felt I was hammering the nylon barrier. In fact, my confidence was growing, and I was beginning to enjoy myself. But on the 4th crossing, there was a ginormous explosion and a blinding flash. I felt as if my guts had been knocked out. My canopy was gone. This caused what was called explosive decompression. And I remembered yelling, "Shit," or the F word, or probably both. I found I was in a steep climb at 30,000 feet. With no pressurization, breathing was a problem. And then the radio started. Just about everybody seemed to be yelling at me. Do this, do that, don't do this, don't do that. I got fed up and told them all to go and get screwed and change frequencies. I then set about sorting myself out. My elevators were jammed, my rudder control was marginal, the explosion had blown my cockpit off, and the windscreen was cracked. I remembered the weather forecast that morning before takeoff. The sea temperature was 4 degrees centigrade. Ejecting was not an option, or at very least, the last option. In that water, I would last 5 minutes at best. I found I could control my descent by adjusting the throttle. I assessed that the lowest speed was about 250 knots, 470 kilometers an hour. I realized that I must have collided with the banner. I was not sure about the tow plane. I changed over to international distress 1 to 1.5 and sent out a mayday. Royal Naval Air Station Ford on the south coast of England took control of me. After playing 20 questions to establish what my situation was, Ford sent me out towards the French coast. I was to reduce height very slowly and reduce speed down to 300 knots, 550 kilometers an hour. I was then put into a very gentle turn, less than rate 1, and I was lined up on very long finals with Ford runway. This maneuver required revs of about 10,500, a lot more power than for a normal descent. I crossed the boundary fence at 250 knots, 470 kilometers an hour. I touched down, jammed on brakes, burst all 3 tires, and came to rest about 50 yards from the end of the runway. When I got out, I was absolutely amazed and shocked. It was incredible that this aircraft had stayed in the air. The banner was wrapped around the elevators and across the rudder. I had hit the metal bar in front at well over 850 kilometers an hour. The bar folded around the nose of the aircraft, cracked open the windscreen, and then ripped open the side of the fuselage, dislodging the canopy in the process. There you can see part of it. But I was down, I was in one piece, and I was dry. And what's more, I brought the banner back. The plane was a write-off. The gun sight camera film was processed and proved I had had a fluke shell which actually severed the tow line. The banner literally stopped in flight right in front of me. The eventual board of inquiry were confused as what decision to reach. They concluded that on the one hand, I had handled the whole affair in a very commendable manner and had demonstrated a high degree of skill. But on the other hand, I had probably broken all the rules of engagement, especially being far too close. I ended up with a notation in my logbook. Lieutenant Rostovsky today incurred their lordships' grave displeasure in writing off one of Her Majesty's fighter aircraft, but landed successfully at Royal Naval Air Station Ford. Mr. Chairman, Monday is the Queen's birthday, and I have realized why in over 50 years I have never had an invitation to a garden party or a tea party, not even a telephone call. And then it struck me. In wishing her a very happy birthday, it is time for me to tell her, I apologize most profusely for writing off one of your fighter aircraft.